My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 37 years old, a documentary archivist and footage clearance specialist in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and at 8:05 on a Friday night, I walked into the North Star Independent Film Festival and saw my younger brother standing beside a movie poster made from my grandmother's house, my interviews, my raw footage, and my silence. Reporters clustered near a step-and-repeat wall. A streaming scout sat in the front row with a black notebook on her lap. My brother Daniel was on stage under a spotlight, one hand over his heart, accepting praise for The House on Linden Street, a documentary he had submitted as sole director, sole writer, sole editor, and sole creator. My mother, Elaine, stood near the reporters with wet eyes, already preparing her proud mother face. My father, Thomas, sat in the second row and kept looking at the carpet. Daniel's wife, Brianna, held her phone upright for a live stream, smiling like a producer who thought the film had already been sold. I was seated near the aisle as family guest. No producer, archive, or camera credit. No mention in the program. In my bag was a black external hard drive wrapped with red tape that said, "Linden Raw, do not erase." On it were 42 hours of interviews, raw metadata, original release forms, restored home movies, music receipts, the grant application I wrote, copyright registration, festival clearance emails, and a voice memo where Daniel said, "Nora built the whole archive. I just know how to sell the story." Then my mother laughed softly for a reporter and said, "Nora only held the camera. Daniel was the one who knew how to turn pain into art." I did not move. I did not blink. I pressed my thumb into the edge of the hard drive until the plastic bit my skin. Before I tell you what happened when the festival director asked who owned the raw footage and my brother went silent, tell me this first. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before my family understands that the story is not yours because you speak louder. Daniel had always been the Whitfield who could turn a sentence into applause. He was 32, handsome in a soft, tired artist way, and he had mastered the kind of pauses that made people lean forward and confuse him with depth. I was the older daughter who labeled boxes, corrected dates, scanned photographs, checked releases, stored files in 3 places, and ruined family mythology by asking who actually owned what. My mother called Daniel sensitive. She called me controlling. My father called Daniel gifted. He called me thorough, but only when no one else was listening. Daniel could visit Grandma Marion for 20 minutes, record her talking about the old house on his phone, and Mom would say he had a filmmaker's heart. I could spend 6 weekends digitizing her VHS tapes before they molded in a basement box, and Mom would say, "Nora has always liked that technical stuff." Technical stuff was how I kept dead people from being misquoted. Technical stuff was how I kept living people from being used. The family archive began with Grandma Marion Whitfield, not with Daniel, not with Brianna, and certainly not with the film poster glowing in that lobby. Grandma Marion lived in the yellow house on Linden Street, the one with green shutters, a cracked front step, and a kitchen wall full of pencil marks where she measured every grandchild's height. She was not famous. She had cleaned offices for 31 years, led the church clothing pantry, and kept shoeboxes full of photographs labeled in blue ink. She was the person who taught me that memory needed custody. "If you keep the story, keep the record too," she told me when I was 14, after Uncle Ray tried to claim a war photograph was his when her handwriting was on the back. She turned the photo over, tapped her name, and said, "A loud man will borrow history if the quiet woman forgets to label it." I labeled everything after that. Birthdays, street addresses, funeral programs, church picnic footage, home movies, tape numbers, names of people in the background. The archive was never a hobby to me. It was a fence around truth. Daniel liked the emotional parts without the fence. When Grandma Marion got sick, he came by with flowers and filmed the porch light at sunset. I came with a hard drive, a scanner, interview questions, backup batteries, and release forms written in plain English because I knew memory could become money the minute someone edited it well enough. Daniel told stories beautifully. I recorded them accurately. That difference built the whole betrayal. At first, I wanted him involved. That is the part that still embarrasses me. He had drifted between short films, commercial gigs, and creative declarations that never quite became rent. I had steady work clearing archival footage for documentaries, universities, and oral history projects. I knew rights, consent, chain of title, E&O packets, music licensing, festival submissions, and the quiet legal machinery behind every moving image that looks effortless on screen. When Daniel said he wanted to make something about Grandma's house before it was sold, I thought maybe grief had finally given him discipline. I told him we could make a family oral history project. Limited community archive. No commercial use without new releases. No festival submission without proper ownership. He nodded through everything. It made people think they had been heard. We began in Grandma Marion's living room with the curtains half closed and the radiator clicking under the window. I set up 2 cameras, lapel mics, a light stand, and a release form on the coffee table. Daniel brought coffee and said he loved the atmosphere. Grandma Marion wore her purple cardigan and asked if I was getting her good side. I said all her sides were properly exposed. She laughed so hard the mic clipped. That sound is still in the raw files. Mrs. Lillian Price, Grandma's best friend, came over that afternoon with a tin of lemon cookies and a memory about the night the women on Linden Street hid union flyers in laundry baskets because the men were afraid to get fired. Daniel's eyes lit up. "That is cinema," he whispered. I whispered back, "That is Lillian's story. We need her consent." He waved me off like consent was rain during a picnic. I put the release in front of Mrs. Price anyway. Limited community archive use. No commercial sale, no festival or distribution use without additional permission. She signed because she trusted me. Not him, me. For 2 years, I recorded 42 hours of interviews. Grandma Marion, Mrs. Price, old neighbors, a retired postal worker, my father's cousin who remembered the house before the highway cut through the neighborhood. I digitized 318 photographs, restored 19 VHS tapes, scanned letters, cleaned audio, built a timeline, and wrote the first grant application for a community history pilot. I paid for audio cleanup on 3 interviews because the radiator hissed through half of Grandma's best story. I licensed a piece of church piano music from a local composer who had known her. Daniel showed up when he wanted to talk about vision. He was good in the room when people were already comfortable. He asked the pretty questions. I asked the necessary ones. He asked, "What did that feel like?" I asked, "What year was that and who else was there?" Both mattered. Only one survived into his credits. The first erasure was small. A Festival Lab application Daniel sent without showing me listed him as director and me as archival assistant. I told him to correct it. He said the form had limited space. I said there was enough space for truth. He laughed and called me intense. Mom said I should be proud he was taking the project seriously. Dad said Daniel needed confidence. I was 36 years old, still being asked to donate accuracy to my brother's self-esteem. I made him revise it. He did, but not completely. Director, Daniel Whitfield. Archival materials courtesy of Nora Whitfield. Courtesy. Like I was a polite woman handing him a casserole, not the person who owned the footage. Then Brianna entered the project and turned theft into strategy. She had worked in branded content and understood that Daniel's grief face could open doors if my file structure stayed out of frame. She started calling me the archive person. She said, "The archive person," with a smile, like a compliment wearing gloves. She asked for copies of raw footage to help Daniel build a teaser. I sent low-resolution watermarked files with a license note. She asked for clean exports because watermarks distracted from emotion. I said no. Daniel called me that night. "Nora, you are choking the film." I said, I am protecting the people in it. He said, Grandma wanted this scene. Grandma wanted truth kept, I said. He hung up. The next week, my father called and said Daniel was devastated that I did not trust him. I told Dad trust was not a clearance packet. He said, do not make legacy about paperwork. Legacy without paperwork is where thieves hold meetings. The hidden power was not romantic. It was boring and strong. I owned the raw footage because I shot it on my equipment, logged it under my business, and registered the initial collection with the Copyright Office as the Whitfield Linden Street Oral History Archive. I held the original interview releases. Most were limited to family and community archive use. Mrs. Price's release explicitly excluded commercial exhibition without new written consent. The music license was in my name. The first grant application listed me as project lead and Daniel as creative collaborator, because that was what he was. The edit timeline lived on my drive. The festival could not legally screen or distribute that film without valid rights. Daniel knew enough to know that. Brianna knew more than enough. That was why they tried to turn my presence at the premiere into permission. The accidental proof arrived at 10:14 the morning of the premiere. A festival clearance coordinator named Lena emailed me the final E&O packet by mistake because my name appeared as copyright owner in the raw footage metadata. She wrote, Nora, could you confirm whether the attached rights transfer letter reflects your agreement? We are finalizing tonight's screening clearance for Daniel Whitfield's feature. I opened the attachment and felt the air leave my body. It was a rights transfer letter claiming I had gifted the Linden Archive to the family and authorized Daniel's production company to use all footage, interviews, photographs, music, and derivative edits for festival, broadcast, and streaming distribution. The signature at the bottom looked like mine if someone had traced it from an old equipment rental form. The date was impossible. I had been in Duluth that day clearing footage for a labor documentary, and my phone GPS, receipts, and calendar could prove it. Under interview releases, the packet included updated forms for several elders. Mrs. Price's update had a digital signature she would never have known how to make. She was 84 and still asked me to enlarge text messages. A forged signature on my name was theft. A forged consent from an elder was something colder. I called Lena. She transferred me to Maya Chen, the festival director. Maya had the calm voice of a woman who had paused screenings before and hated doing it. I told her I had not signed the transfer. I told her the original releases were limited. I told her Mrs. Lillian Price could not be commercially exhibited without additional consent. Maya did not accuse me of drama. She asked for documents. I sent the copyright registration, raw metadata screenshots, original releases, grant application, music receipt, and the voice memo where Daniel admitted the archive was mine. Maya went quiet after the voice memo. Then she said, "The screening starts at 8:30. Will you be present?" I said, "They invited me as family." She said, "Bring the drive." That was the first time all day my hands stopped shaking. Before I left, I pulled the black hard drive from the fireproof box under my desk. Red tape. Linden Raw, do not erase. The label was mine, written after the first week of interviews, when Grandma Marion forgot we had already recorded the porch story and told it again, differently, better. I packed the original releases in a folder, the copyright certificate, the grant application, the festival email chain, the music license, the forged transfer letter, and the USB backup with Daniel's voice memo. I also called Mrs. Price's daughter to make sure Lillian would not be left alone in that theater if the night turned ugly. Her daughter said Mrs. Price was already there because Daniel had sent a car. Of course he had. Elder witnesses look beautiful in premiere photos until their consent becomes inconvenient. The near miss came in the theater lobby near the poster wall. Brianna approached with a cream envelope and a producer smile. Before we get swept into the night, everyone is signing a memory card for Grandma Marion, she said. Her phone was in her other hand, ready for a sweet behind-the-scenes clip. I opened the envelope. The top page had a photo of Grandma's porch and a line about sharing stories. Under it was a retroactive copyright assignment and personal release confirming I supported Daniel's ownership and waived any claim to raw footage, interviews, edit timelines, festival revenue, and distribution rights. My signature line was highlighted. The audacity was almost tidy. "This is not a memory card," I said. Brianna's smile thinned. "It just helps avoid confusion." Confusion is not the word for forged paperwork. Daniel appeared behind her, wearing a black suit and the soft scarf he wore when he wanted people to call him an artist. "Nora, please, tonight is not the time." "Then why did you bring a release to the lobby?" His eyes moved toward my bag. He knew what was inside. "You always have to control the story." I said, "No, I kept the record." My mother came up beside him. "Do not embarrass your brother in front of the festival." Not do not lie, not do not steal, do not embarrass. Family language had never sounded cleaner or uglier. Inside the theater, the program booklet did exactly what I feared. The House on Linden Street, directed by Daniel Whitfield, written by Daniel Whitfield, edited by Daniel Whitfield, produced by Brianna Whitfield. Archival materials, the Whitfield Family Collection. I turned the page. Special thanks, Nora Whitfield and family. Special thanks. A grave for labor with polite flowers. Mrs. Price was seated 3 rows ahead of me with a knitted shawl over her shoulders, looking at the screen where Grandma Marion's face looped silently in the trailer. I saw her lips move. She was saying Marion's name. That almost undid me. Not the credit theft, not the poster. That. An old woman trusting that the people who loved her friend would not turn her own words into a sales asset. The pre-screening reception started with short remarks. Maya welcomed the crowd. Daniel stood beside her, basking in the hush of 210 people waiting to be moved. 3 reporters stood near the back wall. Judges sat in the center rows. A streaming scout leaned forward. Brianna's live stream glowed in her hand. My mother had positioned herself near Daniel like grief had a family spokesperson. Dad sat beside her, eyes down again. Then a local critic asked Daniel how he had carried such an intimate family archive into cinema. Daniel put one hand over his chest. "I grew up with these stories," he said. He did not. He had avoided them until they had festival value. I knew someone had to protect them before they disappeared. My fingers tightened around the hard drive. Protect them. That word in his mouth felt like a door kicked open. Then Mom delivered the line for the reporter. Nora only held the camera. Daniel was the one who knew how to turn pain into art. A few people chuckled. Daniel did not correct her. He looked at me with a sad little smile, as if I were already forgiven for making this hard. That was when Maya stepped back to the microphone. Her face had changed since the welcome. Not dramatic. Official. "Before we begin tonight's screening," she said, "we need to clarify a rights question involving source footage." The lobby noise stopped. Daniel blinked. Brianna lowered her phone half an inch. Maya continued. "The festival clearance file identifies Nora Whitfield as the copyright owner of the raw footage used in this film. The transfer letter submitted to us is now disputed. Who owns the raw footage?" The question did not echo. It landed. Daniel laughed once, lightly. "This is a family project." Maya looked at him. "That is not an ownership answer." I stood from the aisle seat with the black hard drive in my left hand and the folder in my right. I did not rush. Rushing gives liars a rhythm. I walked to the front row and placed the hard drive on the small table beside the water pitcher. Red tape facing the room. "Linden Raw, do not erase." "I own the raw footage," I said. Daniel's face tightened. "Nora shot some material." 42 hours. I open the folder. All primary interviews. I place the copyright registration on the table. Registered archive. Then the release forms. Limited consent. Then the music receipt. Licensed by me. Then the grant application. Project lead. The first room shift happened quietly. A reporter stopped typing. A judge leaned forward. Mrs. Price turned around in her seat and looked at me, not at Daniel. Brianna stepped in, voice smooth. Nora gifted the archive to the family so Daniel could complete the film. I placed the forged transfer letter beside the copyright certificate. This is the letter you submitted. Maya picked it up. Nora says she did not sign this. Brianna said, she may not remember. It was emotional. That sentence was a mistake. People who steal from archivists should not mention memory. I took out the equipment rental form they had copied and placed it beside the transfer. Same signature curve, same scan mark near the W. You copied this. Maya looked at both pages. The scan artifact matches. Daniel said, you are making this ugly. I looked at the screen behind him, where Grandma Marion smiled in a freeze frame from my camera. You submitted my dead grandmother's house with a forged chain of title. Ugly had arrived before I did. Then I played the voice memo. Not loud, just enough through Maya's laptop connected to the theater speakers. Daniel's recorded voice filled the room, casual and amused from a year earlier. Nora built the whole archive. I just know how to sell the story. The silence after it was different from the silence before. Before, people were confused. After, they were rearranging moral furniture. Daniel stared at the floor. My mother whispered, that was private. I said, so were the raw files. That was the first proof slap, and it did not need a long speech. Daniel tried the jealousy frame. Nora is angry because I finished what she could not. I opened the edit timeline metadata. You finished with my source files. Maya looked at the timestamps. These project files originate from Nora's archive drive. Brianna said, he transformed them. Maya said, transformation does not erase clearance requirements. The second proof came from Mrs. Price. She stood slowly with help from her daughter, one hand on the seat in front of her. I signed for Nora, she said. Her voice was thin but clear. Not for selling. The whole room turned. Daniel's face went pale. I moved toward her but stopped because this was her sentence, not mine. Maya asked gently, Mrs. Price, did you sign a new release for festival distribution? No, she said. Daniel told me it was for Marion's memory night. Brianna closed her eyes. A judge lowered his program. The vulnerable person they had brought for credibility had just become the clearest witness in the room. My mother walked toward me, voice low and shaking. Stop this before you ruin him. He used Lillian without consent. Your grandmother would want people to see the film. Grandma would want the people in it respected. Dad finally stood. I looked at him and waited. He had seen me store those tapes. He had carried boxes from Grandma's basement to my car. He had watched Daniel arrive late and leave early. But my father loved peace more than accuracy when Daniel's face was on the line. Maya asked him, Mr. Whitfield, who maintained the family archive? Dad's jaw moved once. Then he said, Nora did. My mother turned on him. Thomas. He kept his eyes on the floor. She did. Late truth is still heavy. It did not heal me. It did change the room. Maya announced the screening would be paused pending rights review. Not canceled yet. Paused. That word destroyed Daniel more than shouting would have. Award eligibility frozen. Distribution conversations suspended. Clearance packet under legal review. Daniel said, "You cannot do this. People are seated." Maya replied, "That is why we have to." Clean. Administrative. Fatal. Brianna asked whether they could screen a private cut without distribution. Maya said the consent issue extended to exhibition itself. Mrs. Price's daughter nodded hard. The streaming scout closed her notebook. A reporter slipped into the lobby to make a call. Consequences do not always stomp. Sometimes they put the notebook away. Daniel turned to me then, and for the first time all night, he looked less like a filmmaker and more like my little brother, who had been protected so long he thought the room itself would move for him. "Nora," he said, "do not take this from me." I almost laughed because the sentence was backwards. "You screened my work under your name. I made it beautiful. You made it unauthorized. You care more about forms than Grandma." I held up the hard drive. I cared enough to keep her voice uncut. That line stopped him for 1 second, not because he agreed, but because the raw files carried what his film had trimmed away. Grandma laughing too long. Mrs. Price correcting dates. Dad admitting he avoided the house after Grandma got sick. Mom leaving the room when grief did not flatter her. Daniel had turned pain into art by removing the parts that made him uncomfortable. The public confrontation moved into the festival's small green room because Maya needed statements before deciding whether any excerpt could legally screen. The green room had black couches, a makeup mirror, bottled water, and a poster from a film that had won awards before any of us were in this mess. Present were Maya, Lena, the clearance coordinator, Daniel, Brianna, Mom, Dad, me, Mrs. Price with her daughter, and 2 festival legal volunteers. The door stayed open. I insisted. Closed rooms had protected my brother for years. Lena opened the clearance packet on a laptop. Source footage listed, Whitfield Family Archive. Owner field in metadata, Nora Whitfield. Submitted rights transfer, disputed. Interview release updates, unverified. Music license holder, Nora Whitfield. Grant application owner, Nora Whitfield. Daniel sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at his shoes. Brianna kept whispering that this was a misunderstanding. Maya asked, "Who uploaded the transfer letter?" Brianna said she handled submissions based on Daniel's assurances. Daniel said he believed the archive belonged to the family. I said, "Then why forge my signature?" Nobody answered. A room full of filmmakers and lawyers can go very quiet when the plot stops serving them. The third proof was the grant application. I placed it on the coffee table. Project lead, Nora Whitfield. Creative collaborator, Daniel Whitfield. Oral history purpose, community archive and limited educational use. Daniel said, "That was early." I placed his email from 6 months later beside it. "Can you send me clean exports so I can build from your timeline? Your structure is better than mine." Then the voice memo transcript. Then the footage metadata. Then Mrs. Price's original limited release. Maya asked Daniel directly, "Did you obtain new consent from Mrs. Price for festival exhibition?" He looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at Mrs. Price's daughter. No answer. Maya said, "The screening cannot proceed." There it was. The lie died in a room smaller than the theater, but full of people who could not pretend they had not watched it happen. My mother started crying then. Not softly. Publicly. "You have always been jealous of his gift," she said. "You never understood art." I looked at her across the coffee table. Art does not need forged releases. Dad said my name once, a warning and an apology tangled together. I ignored him. Mrs. Price reached across and touched the edge of the hard drive. "Marion trusted you," she said. That almost broke me. Control has a shelf life. Mine was cracking. I nodded once because if I spoke, I might have cried, and my family had always been good at editing tears into instability. Maya gave the audience a neutral announcement. Tonight's screening of The House on Linden Street was postponed due to rights and clearance issues. Tickets would be honored for a future program or refunded. Daniel did not return to the stage. Brianna did not continue the live stream. Mom did not speak to reporters. I stood in the lobby beside Mrs. Price while people filed out under the poster made from my footage. Some looked annoyed. Some looked curious. A few looked at Daniel like they had watched a magic trick fail. The streaming scout walked past him without stopping. That was the first business consequence. He felt it. I saw his shoulders drop. A reporter approached me near the exit and asked for comment. I said only, "Elder stories require consent, and family archives require ownership clarity." Boring, exact, unusable as drama. Perfect. Then I walked outside into the Minneapolis cold with the hard drive in my bag and the folder under my arm. My hands started shaking at the curb. Not from regret, from holding still too long. I sat in my car for 15 minutes while my phone filled. Daniel called 8 times. Mom called 12. Dad twice. Brianna sent a message that said, "You are exposing us to legal risk." I replied once. "You submitted the risk." Then I turned off the phone. The fallout began before midnight. The festival froze Daniel's audience award eligibility. The streaming scout requested notice when rights were resolved, which was a polite way of leaving. 2 reporters published short pieces about a postponed premiere due to clearance questions. Brianna deleted the production company post, calling the film a son's act of preservation. Deletion is not disappearance. I had screenshots. Maya had the packet. Mrs. Price's daughter had recorded her mother's statement in the green room because she was tired of older women's words being softened after the fact. The next morning, Daniel posted that the premiere had been delayed because of family disagreement over archival credit. That was another lie, smaller but still living. I sent him one email through my attorney. Cease all public exhibition, distribution, submission, or promotional use of footage, interviews, photographs, music, and edited materials derived from the Whitfield Linden Street Oral History Archive until rights are resolved. He answered me directly, not the attorney. "You are killing Grandma's story." I wrote back, "No, I am keeping it from being stolen twice." Dad came to my apartment 3 days later with a grocery bag of old VHS tapes he had found in his closet. It was his peace offering and confession. I did not let him inside at first. We stood in the hallway while snow melted from his boots onto the mat. "I should have said it sooner," he said. "Yes." He flinched, but I did not soften it. "You knew." "I knew you did the work." "You let Mom call me a camera holder." He looked at the bag. Daniel needed something to be his. That sentence hurt more than anger would have. "So you gave him mine." Dad closed his eyes. "I did not think of it that way." "That is because you were not the one being erased." He handed me the tapes. I took them, not as forgiveness, as evidence that some part of him finally understood custody. Before he left, he said, "Your grandmother would have wanted people to know." I said, "Then we will do it correctly." Correctly is not warm, but it is clean. My mother took longer and did worse. She sent a 5-paragraph email about bitterness, art, family legacy, and how Daniel had always been fragile under pressure. I printed it because old habits die usefully. Then I highlighted one line. "Nora always kept things locked away." I mailed her a copy of the release Mrs. Price had signed, with the limited use clause circled. Locked away was what my mother called consent when consent blocked applause. She did not respond for 2 weeks. Then she texted, "Your grandmother would be ashamed." I typed and deleted 3 versions. Finally, I sent a picture of Grandma Marion's handwriting on a photo envelope. Nora, save these right. Nothing else. My mother could argue with me. She could not argue with Grandma's label. Daniel's apology came in pieces, none of them whole at first. He said he was sorry the night got out of hand. He was sorry Brianna used the wrong form. He was sorry I felt erased. I did not accept any of that because passive apologies are costume changes. Then, after the festival legal review confirmed the film could not screen without new agreements, he sent a shorter message. I knew you owned the footage. I thought you would never actually stop it. That was the first true thing he had written. It was ugly. It was useful. I replied, that is why I had to. The legal correction took months. I did not hand him the film. I did not destroy it either. The raw archive stayed mine. Mrs. Price and 2 other interview subjects revoked any festival use until they could review context. The music license remained under my name. Daniel's edit was frozen. Eventually, through counsel and Maya's mediation, I allowed a limited community screening of selected clips under a corrected program. The Linden Street Oral History Archive, preserved by Nora Whitfield, with excerpts edited by Daniel Whitfield. Daniel hated the wording until he realized the alternative was nothing. Brianna's producer credit was removed from archival ownership language. The film title changed. The house on Linden Street became Excerpts from Linden Street. Smaller, truer. Sometimes justice is not a premiere. Sometimes it is a corrected caption. Mrs. Price attended the community screening 3 months later at the library, not the Riverton Theater. No red carpet, no streaming scout, folding chairs, weak coffee, a projector that hummed too loudly, and a table of release forms written in large print. Before the clips played, I stood up and explained consent. Not dramatically, clearly. Everyone whose interview appeared had reviewed the cut. Everyone had the right to withdraw. No story would be sold without new permission. Mrs. Price nodded from the front row. Daniel sat in the back. My mother did not attend. Dad did. When Grandma Marion's laugh filled the library room, I finally cried. No one edited it. No one filmed me. No one called it instability. It was just grief, arriving after safety. That night changed my work. I had always helped institutions and filmmakers clear rights. After the premiere, I launched Whitfield Archive Rights Studio, focused on families, caregivers, community historians, and small documentary teams working with elders' stories. I built workshops on raw footage ownership, interview consent, copyright transfer, festival clearance, music licensing, release forms, and the difference between family access and legal rights. I called the first one, Do Not Sign the Memory Card. On the table, I placed the black hard drive, a sample release with plain language clauses, a fake festival packet, and a checklist titled, The Story is Not Yours Because You Speak Louder. 26 people came. One woman brought tapes from her mother's civil rights group. One man brought interviews with his grandfather that his cousin wanted to put on YouTube. A caregiver brought audio recordings from a client who had dementia and asked whether consent still counted. We talked for 3 hours. Nobody asked how to make the story prettier. They asked how to keep it honest. That felt like a better premiere than Daniel's. I still have the hard drive. The red tape is worn at the corners now. Inside the case, I keep a copy of Grandma Marion's original release note, Mrs. Price's limited consent, the forged transfer letter, Maya's postponement notice, and the corrected community screening program. I do not keep them because I enjoy remembering the betrayal. I keep them because my family taught me that memory without custody becomes a stage for the loudest person. Daniel and I are not close. We speak through email about archive access. He has made smaller films since then, with actual releases, which may be the closest thing to growth he can offer right now. Brianna no longer calls me the archive person. She barely calls me anything. That is fine. My name is in the documents where it matters. Dad has started bringing unlabeled photos to my studio. He sits at the work table and writes names on the back while I scan. Sometimes he pauses and says, "I should have listened." I say, "Yes." Then we keep labeling. Repair does not always look like hugging. Sometimes it looks like a man learning the names of women he once let disappear. My mother still believes Daniel has the artist's soul, and I have the locked cabinet. Cabinets protect things. Souls are not harmed by consent forms. Grandma Marion's house on Linden Street is gone now. Sold, renovated, painted a gray color she would have hated. But her laugh still exists in 3 backups. Mrs. Price's Union Flyer story exists under the consent she chose. The porch light footage exists with the correct metadata. The family photographs have names. The archive breathes because it is protected, not because Daniel spoke beautifully beside a poster. My family invited me to the premiere as the girl who held the camera because they thought holding the camera was smaller than holding the microphone. They forgot the camera made the record. They forgot the record had an owner. They forgot that the people in those frames trusted the woman behind the lens more than the man selling the story. So tell me, if your family stole your footage, erased your credit, and called it legacy, would you sit quietly so the premiere could happen? And if the festival director asked who owned the raw footage, would you let the loudest person keep the story, or open the hard drive and let the record speak?